COP29 Conference 2024, Developing Financing Solutions for Sustainability. These insights on COP29 are brought to you by Nedbank.
The global COP29 Climate Conference in Azerbaijan has once again focused the attention of the world on the importance of issues like the transition to green energy, climate finance, and for people and countries in Africa, agreement on what's become known as climate justice. Joining me now on this special COP29 panel is Bronwyn Price, Executive of Strategy and Sustainability at Nedbank CIB, Xolelwa Katiye-Katishe, the project lead at Indlulamithi SA Scenarios, and Biggie Tangane, who is the engagement manager at the African Natural Capital Alliance. Ladies and gents, thank you very much for joining us on this special COP29 panel discussion.
Thank you for having us.
So let's set the scene with COP29. What are the main issues that have come to the fore? Perhaps set the scene for us. Why is COP29 so relevant, not only for Nedbank, but also for all aspects of society?
I think if we look at where we are at the moment, the decisions that we're taking in the next decade will really influence the outcome of our planet for the generations to come. 2024 is likely to be the warmest year on record, and we see temperatures rising above 1.5 degrees. I think our planet faces unprecedented challenges with regards to environmental degradation, climate change, and socio-economic inequalities. I mean, some of the hard truths that we face up to this year is that the global decarbonization rate was 1.02% in 2023, which is far below the required 20% per year. South Africa needs 6 trillion of investments to reach net zero by 2050. With nearly half of that needed for the power sector. And in South Africa, we face a triple crisis of low economic growth, unemployment, and the highest inequality in the world. From a Nedbank perspective, COP is essential in coordinating international responses to these challenges. And whilst making progress is slower than we would have liked, it is a vital tool for making progress. And we have seen outcomes such as the Paris Agreement and the global stocktake, which have provided the basis for change at a global level. I think if we look at this year, we're really hoping to see consensus on the outcomes that they're driving, the agenda points, so that we can make progress in the transition.
Xolelwa, perhaps from your perspective, some of the main issues?
From my perspective, I think it's important that it happens at a year where most of the global population has gone to election or still going to election, with the American election being, the major one. But even ourselves as South Africa, we've just gone through an election year, and there's been a lot of shifts in terms of the political landscape, not only in terms of the country, in the continent as well. There's been some shifts. We've seen our neighbors in Botswana, and also what is happening in Mozambique. And then when you look at global powers such as the United States, so that kind of political shift is going to be telling in terms of the future of the conversations that are happening at COP. I mean, in the past, we've had developing countries or countries from the global south being marginalized and not really heard in such platforms. And this is not just unique in terms of COP, but a whole lot of these, multilateral platforms, especially those that are informed by the United Nations. You find that there's a marginalized voice from the South, but then in particular in COP, in recent years, there's been, an emergence of that voice, coming in very strongly. And I think to a certain extent, we've found that countries such as ourselves have been faring, quite decently in terms of mitigation strategies. However, what we found is that those countries in the global north seem to be the ones who are not performing as well as they should, whereas they are the biggest contributors. So now combining that with this inequality in terms of the voices, with the fact that there's a shifting global political landscape, it's going to be interesting to see what is going to happen. Are those dominant countries going to shift their positions? And is the voice from the South going to continue emerging, or is it going to be diminished as it was in the past? So it's going to be very interesting.
Biggie, from your perspective, obviously, the discussions around finance and everything else is very focused, and yet, as Xolelwa was already saying, there is this north-south thing and responsibility and questions about accountability.
Yeah, I think the effects of climate change are being felt today in the region. So Southern Africa, I think, has gone through the worst drought in decades this year. And that has decimated the agricultural sector in these countries, but also vulnerable communities that depend on subsistence farming. So I think countries are looking for adaptation finance for them to be able to deal with this real situation that they're in. And I think it's important, and I think Bronwyn will touch on this. This year's theme is really about raising the quantum goal of climate finance. So what's the financial goal that we are trying to hit from either developing countries or developed countries to be able to deal with adaptation? So, yeah.
So, Xolelwa, coming back to developing countries, the voices going there as a collective, are they united? What is at stake? Is there how should these discussions and how have they been approached?
I think what has been very interesting for me in particular has been especially the voices coming from Latin America in terms of just even unpacking the science, because there's this idea that even not only is the inequality in terms of being heard or having a seat at the table or being represented, but it's in terms of even strategies to mitigate. So you'd find that indigenous communities, for example, do have their own ways of knowing that could potentially contribute to strategies for the future, but those that way of knowing is also marginalized. There's this dominance of a particular kind of science. I don't want to be bashing science here because I'm also a scientist myself, but there is a particular type of science that valorizes, certain ways of looking at things, certain ways to approach preservation, conservation, and so on, while leaving behind the local people who feel the effects the most. So the sooner we can find the solidarity amongst those nations in the South, or for example, if we as a continent, if we can come in as a bloc or as a nation, how do we then utilize our membership of the BRICS Plus formation so that we can form a bloc of solidarity with a much stronger voice? Because with the things that are happening globally, with this global shift in terms of economic power and political power towards the East, we might easily be left behind. So it would be important to forge those networks and agreements and not necessarily depend on just the countries in the North and just be mere followers. Because so far, we seem to be followers in terms of even solutions and even financing.
Bronwyn, let's talk about climate financing, big word, and how much is being said around the different models of climate finance? There is, of course, the North view, there's the global South view, there is the Africa view, and so, and particularly lower income countries are grappling with the concept of who's really responsible for the issue in the first place, and then trying to catch up economically in their own territories. What's the ideal outcome in this regard?
I think the ideal outcome for us would be to be a renegotiation of the finance agreements that happened at the 2009 COP. Back then, developed nations had pledged to spend 100 billion annually in climate financing for developing countries by 2020. It was a goal that was met 2 years late, according to the OECD. But now we're looking at a new target to come out of this COP. I think it's a very difficult thing to negotiate. I think the political landscape at the moment makes it harder, especially having just emerged from a pandemic. Countries are still recovering. But ultimately, a clear consensus and a goal on the new collective quantified goal, which is called NCQG, because we love acronyms. I think that would be a huge progress from this COP coming out.
Biggie, from your view, so now there are the geopolitical views, there are the social views, but we live during a time in which economic development is so intertwined with everything, all aspects of society, and climate change and economic development cannot be separated. climate justice and green economies and the economy and industrial growth cannot be separated. So from your perspective, perhaps, how do you see businesses and the economic environment adapting and ensuring that there is a more responsible approach to climate change?
Sure, I think it obviously depends on the industry that the business is in, but I think businesses today are looking at integrating climate risks and opportunities into their business models and trying to understand what those risks and opportunities are, but also looking into disclosing them to their investors and other stakeholders. So that's always a good starting point to understand where you are and what impacts you're going to have. I think the second point is looking at, again, as I was saying, the impacts that the company is going to have in the environment, being able to take stock of that, being able to measure that, being able to get assurance on your disclosures, but also looking at the impact that the climate is going to have on the business, right? So being able to also have foresight on what the business is going to do going into the future. I think also doing that work, not only on your operations as a business, but also on your value chain, just to make sure that your value chain is somewhat secure, or at least you're monitoring the risks that will impact your value chain. And I think the most important thing as well is engaging in policy platforms like COP. So you're seeing a lot more businesses now engaging at COP, a lot more businesses coming up with initiatives, a lot more businesses collaborating across continents, across countries, across industries. So it's very important to get this conversation going at the highest levels. And I think you're seeing more boards being, have taken this conversation very seriously because it impacts the future of the businesses that they look after. So I think that's sort of the direction we're seeing. There's obviously other industries moving at a faster pace than others for obvious reasons. But I think I'm quite optimistic about where this is going to end up. So,
all right, let's talk about recent political issues globally. And I don't think we've lived in a time in the past 100 years where there have been such quick turnarounds in political. I think apart from the obvious era of the world wars, right now geopolitically things are changing so fast, and climate denialism is very much a political tool globally. Xolelwa, I see you are shaking your head ferociously there. How does the outcome of the U.S. election and President Trump back into the White House, how does that change the climate debate? Because he's not really pro-climate. He's had issues, and we also look forward to climate conferences in different parts of the world where there really are strong issues, that question, perhaps very harsh approach from that U.S. administration that will come in the next 5 years.
I think the U.S. election has been a very interesting, I think it's a spanner in the works. It throws a spanner in the works because it, in a way, it also reveals the contradictions that exist within these northern countries. So now you have a leader such as that one emerging. Then what does it mean in terms of all our commitments, in terms of reducing our carbon footprints? There's someone who's denying that there is even a thing called climate change leading the most powerful nation. And then you look at the traditional allies, which are the countries in Europe, and the position thereof, and it's going to be very revealing in terms of how then they relate to one another. But then I think this is an opportunity for, as I was saying, for countries in the South, for that South to South kind of collaboration, because if we continue following, whereas now we've been exposed to the contradictions, is it still worth our while to be followers? Because there is definitely innovation that's coming from countries in the South. There is knowledge production that's coming from countries in the South. So I think collaboration at all different levels, country to country collaboration, region to region, and while also managing carefully the balance, because I believe that South Africa's stance of non-alignment where geopolitics is concerned has been a very good one. It has sheltered us from many of these conflicts. There was a conflict in Ukraine. It led to, unavailability of gas to European countries who then turned around and were demanding South African coal, whereas we've committed to reducing, our coal emissions. We're supposed to be shutting down our own coal power stations. But then because there's winter in Europe and there's the sanctions with Russia, then it's okay for European countries to use coal. So I think those contradictions need to be really interrogated in terms of where we stand and how to balance. It doesn't mean that we just shift and maybe align ourselves to just the BRICS formation because there seems to be a new world order emerging, but maintaining that stance of non-alignment and balancing multilateral relations.
And Biggie, in your last reference, we spoke to ensuring a more responsible approach to climate economics. Now, there's no doubt of the discrepancy between the economic development and industrial developments of Northern Hemisphere countries and Southern Hemisphere countries, the so-called Global South, which is now a reality. And also, we see through the BRICS formation, new economic force coming. But perhaps from an economics perspective, what do you think are some of the pressing points that delegates at COP29 are talking about ensuring that there is a responsible approach to climate economics within those two blocks, competing blocks for economic, for risk, but also for opportunity?
Yeah, I think, as we mentioned earlier, this year has been quite an active political year globally. So I think governments are trying to balance national policy with global commitments. So I think that's going to be a tension you'll be seeing internally within governments, especially from the developed nations group. I think from developing nations, you're seeing a lot of pressure on actually getting finance, right, to adapt to the new reality that these governments and economies exist in. I think also there's quite a piece that we tend to miss on the opportunities side, right? So the green transition also offers a lot of opportunities, a lot of job creation opportunities, a lot of nature positive transition opportunities, which, could create jobs, could create economic growth for the developing world as well. We talk about this all the time. There's a lot of sunshine in Africa. There's a huge potential there for solar. It's undeniable, right? So when you think about agriculture as well, how do we get our agriculture to become more smart, to be able to produce more in the current conditions that we live in? That's an opportunity to look into. So I think developing nations, the pressure they're having is to deal with the reality currently, but also to catch up with the policy that they need to develop to deal with this and to be able to attract finance. So you're seeing a lot of pressures, I think, from different angles, but those are the ones that I think are currently real, at least at the individual state level.
Bronwyn, from a finance perspective, a lot of, on both sides of the spectrum, banks and financing play an important role, from sovereign institutions right down to your small local branch that helps you because you have a farm and you're dealing with something. So how do you see, are these climate discussions furthering understanding of the opportunity within financing for everyone to participate in the climate revolution?
I think they are. I think we are seeing progress, and if we look at what's happening at the moment from an adaptation perspective, and getting adaptation on track, and that's really key. I think it refers to what Biggie was talking around, is how we look for more sustainable forms of agriculture. How do we adapt to working in a world that is hotter? What are the policies and processes that are being put in place at a government level? And what are the financing initiatives that are coming through to enable local communities to be protected from the impacts of climate change? So I think adaptation is a key long-term response to climate change for people, for lives and livelihoods. And it's really something that we need to see a lot more focus on coming through this COP.
Xolelwa, agriculture, as Bronwyn just mentioned, absolutely at the core. I think the entire world will immediately understand when we run out of food what climate change really has been about. So in terms of food security, conversations at COP29, are the right conversations happening? Are we talking about the correct social building blocks to ensure food security? Probably one of the top three concerns around this entire debate.
I don't think we've been taking food security seriously enough. And actually it presents an opportunity to focus, because also there's no utility in having endless lists of priorities. If we can bring our focus to food security at global level, because it's going to impact on us all. And in terms of the research we're doing in terms of the future of South Africa, the scenarios that we painted around food security and how it's impacted on by climate change, we found that there's a possibility that we could end up at a point where we're importing about 75% of our grains. But there's also another scenario where it's so bad, things are so bad that this leads to diseases. And that impacts on, lives, South African lives and life expectancy. But lastly, also, there's also a potential for a positive scenario where there's investment by business in terms of research and development around agriculture. And in that scenario, we are able to produce new grains new strains of grain that are able to withstand these harsh climate change effects or very high temperatures. So I think in there, it's just about focus, maybe then focusing on agriculture. And as a country, I think there's a great potential there for us to thrive if we were to, put all our efforts towards that sector. And then it will have a knock-on effect, job creation, there's infrastructure development and other industries that then would be part of that value chain. And then we'll also be helping our people so that they don't suffer from the shortages in food.
Okay, final word. Biggie, let's start with you. Perhaps what we see between this, the conclusion of this COP29 and the next one, also keeping in mind that in between other climate conferences are taking place, but some of the major takeaways maybe from this one, how do you see it? And we'll come down the line with that thought.
I think I'm looking forward to seeing what that new quantitative goal that Bronwyn was talking about is going to be, because that's going to give a direction of, what the pledges and commitments, that's where the money is going to come from, right? So that's the starting point of how the capital will flow. So it'll be interesting to see how the structuring of that capital flow is going to be, especially to countries that need it most. So I'm looking forward to seeing that sort of implementation, the next steps beyond the pledges and the big announcements. And also seeing where the next COP is going to be. I'm not sure that's been announced yet, but it's also a bit curious to see where that's going to be and what that presidency is going to be focusing on, what the theme is going to be for that presidency.
Xolelwa?
Well, I look forward to more solidarity, as I stated in my opening, in terms of the developing countries, because it is clear where the northern countries are headed, especially with America at the helm there. I mean, we heard the French president talking about being an omnivore. So, a bit of Trumpism and a bit of, they call themselves the herbivores, and Trump maybe the carnivore, so maybe they should find themselves somewhere in the middle. So I think it is a good moment for countries in the South to actually just find solidarity, collaborate without waiting for, the countries in the North to sneeze so that we catch the cold.
Bronwyn?
We believe that banks are not just financial institutions, but are pivotal change agents in society. Our role extends beyond traditional banking. We are here to drive sustainable practices, to support our clients in their commitments and our communities in their transition, and to lead the charge towards a more resilient future. Clear progress on climate issues at COP drives change in our society and enables Nedbank to really work with our clients on their transition. And that's the key outcome that we're hoping for out of this COP.
Oh, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for coming on to our special COP29 panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
That's where we leave this COP29 panel discussion for now. Many more debates and interviews on this subject over the coming weeks and months as individuals, companies and governments look ahead to again tackle the most burning global climate issues at COP30. And we believe it may be in a city called Belém in the heart of the Amazon region in Brazil in November 25. Imagine that, a COP30 conference in Brazil. Big time stuff. Thanks very much for joining us.
COP29 Conference 2024, Developing Financing Solutions for Sustainability. These insights on COP29 were brought to you by Nedbank.